Hi, I'm Liam Dann, New Zealand Herald Business Editor at Large, and welcome to this episode of Money Talks. This is a podcast about money, but we're not going to tell you how to get rich, and we're not going to try and pick the next interest rate move. In this series, I'll be talking to interesting New Zealanders about how money has shaped their lives and what they've learned over the years. With me today, I have Andrew Barnes, founder of Perpetual Guardian, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and famously pioneer of the 4-day working week. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to Money Talks.
Hi, Liam. Good to be here.
Yeah, great. Look, just before we get into some of those background questions, I'd be keen to know you're not managing Perpetual anymore. What's keeping you most busy these days?
Well, the 4-day week, inevitably, that has actually ruined my 4-day week. I end up spending too many evenings talking to people all over the world. Yeah. We also have a legal tech business in the UK. We've got a wine business on the island, and I sit on a couple of philanthropic boards. So really, that's me for the most part.
Absolutely. And that 4-day week, I mean, we can come back to it a bit later, but the idea and the timing and the fact you actually implemented really has taken hold as an idea around the world, and that's just sparked all this interest.
Yeah, it has. We've got pilot programs running in about 20 countries worldwide. We're also involved in things like Bernie Sanders' legislation before the Senate, Mark Takano's bill before Congress. So this has now moved from company to company to countries actually looking to implement the 4-day week, and we're advising about 6 countries now on that.
Wow. Well, look, I will come back to that, but I want to jump back a bit and get a bit of your personal history. And so the question I like to ask is, what are your first memories of having money or holding money in your hand?
Well, I used to get a couple of pence as a child each week, and I would go down to the local corner shop and buy lollies. Yeah. Now, that was a very critical event for me during the week. I had to work out just how many licorice things I was going to buy versus the fruit salads, and the fruit salads generally were cheaper. Yep. So it was a little bit of economics going on there.
That's great. And so, I'm guessing this is north of England. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Whereabouts exactly did you grow up?
I always say I was born north of the wall, but south of the border.
Right.
So I'm come from the borders, but I grew up in Lancashire, just outside of Preston.
Sure. And so what was life like around then in terms of money and the house and your family and all that sort of stuff?
Well, my parents were the first in both of their families to go to university. In fact, my mum had to leave school at 15 to go and work in the mills because there wasn't enough money in her family. Yeah. And it was only because her headmistress at the Park School in Preston said, "You're too bright for that," and got her a scholarship to go on to Lancaster College of Art, which is where she met my dad. So money was always tight as a family. My parents were teachers, but they certainly weren't well off in any shape or form.
Sure. Do you remember getting pocket money? Or you 2 pence, I guess?
Yeah, my 2 pence, and everything else I had to do. I had to wash cars or cut grass.
Yeah, so after school jobs, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And once you started getting a little bit more money, what were the passions that you would spend money on, or outside of once you got past the corner shop, I guess?
Well, I got myself eventually a job at Boots the Chemists. Well, so I was 16, 17 at the time, and that was really how I sort of funded things in later life. Yeah. And I also worked for an archaeological research unit as well, and got a little bit of cash out of that. But money wasn't a big thing in our family. My parents are possibly the 2 of the most uncommercial people I've ever met. They were actually artists. My brother is an architect. I was the freak of the family that ended up turning their back on art and going into business. But I can't say I really understood it in any shape or any form until, after I left university.
Wow. Yeah, I was curious about the archaeology because I saw that you actually studied that at university. Is that right? So where did that passion come from, and how did you get involved?
Look, I always was interested in history, and when I was 16, as I said, I started to work for the Central Lancashire Archaeological Research Unit. Now, most of that was unpaid, but a bit was paid. And that was my passion. But actually, if you want to find the most poorly paid workforce anywhere in the world, it's on an archaeological dig.
Yeah.
So I decided that archaeology was for talented amateurs. And actually, in fact, I actually then went into the Navy instead of doing archaeology.
Yeah. And so what else did you study at university to give you the, was it sort of commerce or anything like that?
No. I did a bit of law and mostly archaeology.
Right. Yeah. So you, I mean, and are you still passionate about it? Do you still read about it? And...
Yeah. And look, in my 40s, I actually took a bit of a career break and then went digging in Uzbekistan and Cambodia.
Wow.
So
yeah.
It's a thing I would like to do more of. I don't get the chance.
But you made a call early on that this is what you could be passionate about or a hobby or whatever, but it wasn't going to be the way to
Yeah,
to
I always remember
money.
showing up at Sydney University and having a guy parked next to me in a very battered old car, and I'd come back from my job in the city.
Yeah.
And I thought, that student is going to slam the door into my car. And then the professor of archaeology came out and got into it and drove off. So
So then was the Navy a way to get a steady job?
No, I mean, I was passionate about that too, but that was bad. That was Margaret Thatcher first term. Being in the Royal Navy was horrible because most of the Navy was rusting alongside. And I, in the end, bought myself out. I had signed up for a full career commission. And came out 2 months before we went to war in the Falklands. So it was one of those serendipitous things in a way. Had I stayed, I would have stayed in the Navy because obviously the world changed pretty quickly.
Would have been a career.
After that.
Absolutely. And the other thing I ask, and maybe it is around that time of coming out of the Navy, but what's the poorest you think you've ever been?
Oh, very, very recently, actually. Yeah. Just before I came to New Zealand, I'd sold businesses, I'd gone back to the UK, I'd done a private capital deal, and literally they had locked everything up in a way that I couldn't get any money out, and it looked as if they were going to, in fact, take all the cash. And I was literally reduced to phoning my dad and asking for him to lend me some money so I could pay the mortgage. And it was one of those times when you went out for a walk and you work out, are you worth more dead than alive?
Wow. And
that was the low point just before the opportunity arose here in New Zealand. And
so what sort of year was that?
That would be 2012.
2012, so not that long ago. And was it 2014 that it all happened?
I came here late 2012 for the first time.
Yep.
I took over running Perpetual in 2013, and we bought Perpetual at the end of 13 and New Zealand Guardian Trust at the start of 14.
Yeah. So just to jump back again, then you've come out of the Navy. What do you do then? Is it sort of a look around the world and think?
I wanted to be a spy, and I decided that's what I was going to do. And I was going through the process to be recruited into MI6, and they changed the recruitment process, so I had to wait for a bit. And so I was trying to work out what I did, and I thought, well, all my mates have gone into banking.
Yeah.
So I would go into banking as a temporary measure while I was waiting for my final interview. And I then gave myself a good talking to at the ripe old age of 22 and said, Andrew, you've got to stop chasing rainbows and settle down on a sensible job, which had been drummed into me by my parents.
Yeah, I guess that's right. And so you went into the banking and just learned business on the job, is that? Yeah. And I guess there was probably, into the 80s, it sort of all opened up and boomed a bit in the UK.
Yeah, look, I mean, I always say part of the genesis of the 4-day week actually relates to the fact that I had two people with nervous breakdowns in front of me by the time I was, 25.
Wow.
But it did open up because the stock market crash in 87 was the reason I was first sent to Australia. I mean, they literally walked in and said, have you got a passport? I said, yes. And they said, we need you in Sydney on Thursday.
Yeah.
And I went to Australia, and that obviously led to, my career down under.
So what was the nuts and bolts of that job? Were you managing?
I was our man in Havana, basically.
Right, yeah.
We had a suspicion that the organisation had got some exposure to Australian entrepreneurs in those days, including the likes of Alan Bond.
Right, yeah.
And in those days, you had unlimited settlement on equity trades. And I then found out that, in fact, that was right. We had masses of exposure to Alan Bond, and I uncovered it. I made formal demand on him about 3 years before he actually went bust, and we got our money back.
Wow, yeah.
So it was Wild West in those days.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in this country too, I think. If you've probably yeah. It's interesting. So you end up you did get to do a little bit of the espionage detective work in the end.
Well, yes, but not the type I was thinking of. I'm clearly not licensed to kill.
Yeah. And so you could stick with a career in banking your whole life. There must have been a point at which you decided to get out and give things a go in the business world.
Well, really, there were two things. First of all, I had hated the person I had become. I think finance is a very brutal career, and there's a wonderful quote from the book Fever Pitch.
Yeah.
Is life shit because Arsenal are shit, or the other way around? And actually, I felt that was the issue. I hated what I'd become, and I couldn't work out that was because that was just life was rubbish, or actually it was in fact the environment that I was working in. And also at the same time, one of the great might have beens of history occurred, in that I used to run the banking division for Macquarie, and I came across a company called nzherald.co.nz website.
Yep.
I actually bought for the bank a controlling interest for $900,000. We floated it 13 weeks later for $36 million. And then it's gone on, I think it's now worth, I'm going to say $12 billion. I think it is still the most successful fintech type thing that's ever come out of Australia. And I could have had that. I could have bought it for myself. I bought it for the company, and then subsequently, obviously, the Murdochs got their hands on it.
Yeah.
So it could have been Bill Gates and then me, right? But instead, I did the deal for somebody else.
So that motivate you to...
That was the point at which I started to change. It took a while, but started to change to actually do transactions for myself rather than doing them for other people.
Because it's not, as you say, you've come from a background with parents who are teachers, art inclined. That entrepreneurial thing is not always ingrained in it. Some people seem to have it from an early age, and some people you obviously learned it or pushed yourself to go there. Do you think?
I think there is a difference between being creative. I mean, unashamedly, I am an artist. I don't think in numbers. I think in pictures, and that I think has driven a lot of my own career. But it is having the guts to take the leap into the void. I was always doing entrepreneurial things. I mean, even when I was young, I did the largest simultaneous arrest of ships on the high seas ever done by a British merchant bank, and created a new shipping company. Yeah. I think I was 26 at the time. But that I didn't view as being entrepreneurial. I just viewed it as trying to come up with a creative solution to a problem. So actually switching it over, and I think it's one of the things that we've got to do with our young people is to enable them to actually make the experiments outside of those sort of frameworks. Yeah. And it took me until I was 40.
Yeah, and it seems, I mean, this might bring us back round to 4-day weeks and things, but it does seem the world is going a bit more that way. When I look at the media, the kids coming through now are kind of, it's about some of these big institutions aren't necessarily going to be there. People are having to be a bit more entrepreneurial or put their own name behind doing a deal. Or
I think that's true, but I think we've also been living in a little bit of a fool's paradise for the last, 15 years or so, with credit being very cheap and with lots and lots of money washing around looking for a home, where almost any return is better than no return. So I think at the end of the day that yes, there are more people trying to experiment. I think there are more entities which fail along that journey. So if you look at things like Y Combinator in the States, it's sort of 1 in 1,000 gets in, and out of the 1,000 that get in, about 2 or 3 actually, physically succeed. It's a very, very small percentage. And I think we've got to be careful that we're not encouraging people to just, try one of these things in the expectation that they're going to become billionaires. A lot of this is very hard work. A lot of it is very stressful. And that then flows not only into, your own personal circumstances, it flows through into families as well. So it's a valid career choice, but it has to be done with your eyes wide open, I think.
Yeah. Just quickly, I will get you to just tell me about the move to New Zealand and buying Perpetual and how that played out. And this is going to sound like a really stupid question, but I'd be keen for you just to explain in your words how you would describe Perpetual. Because it sometimes it's a hard to categorise. It's the same as it's not insurance or banking, or if you know what I mean. It's
a bit easier now. In those days, in essence, there were 2 aspects to these businesses. The trust companies, we do wills, estate management, and we manage trusts, generally philanthropic trusts, where someone has set up a trust, could be 100 years ago, to give money to a particular cause. And we not only manage the money, but we also manage the gifting process.
Yeah.
Now, until we sold New Zealand Guardian Trust a few years ago, we were also the statutory supervisor for securitizations, managed funds. And the role of the statutory supervisor was to ensure that the manager was doing what they said they were doing on the tin of the fund, if you will. It was not to manage the money, but it was to just make sure that if they said they were going to be investing in infrastructure, they were investing in infrastructure, and they were following the rules as set down by, amongst
others,
the FMA.
Not auditing in the financial sense, but
it's a second set of eyes. Right now, sometimes it works and sometimes it didn't, and I think it predated me, and in fact it gave me the opportunity, was that the corporate trust components failed quite spectacularly in some ways. At least you can argue that, with the collapse of the trusts, the lending trusts, finance companies.
In around 2010, 2011.
Yeah. Now, in fact, they were monitoring them, and the problem was at the next level down. It was actually what was happening. The auditors, the managers, a lot of people seemingly failed into that process. But, that actually did give the opportunity, because everybody looked at these things and said, what the heck are they? They were in some trouble reputation-wise, and therefore you could buy them cheaply. Yeah.
And so that's roughly where you come in at the end of that tumultuous period of New Zealand finance sector.
And Perpetual was owned by one George Kerr of this parish, and it took me a while to, that association, just as a purchaser from George, took quite a while to dissipate here. There was a lot of people who were highly suspicious of what he'd done. Whereas my view is that these are some of the oldest continuously trading companies in New Zealand. And actually what they did fundamentally was pretty good. It was manage people's bequests, legacies, help them with the management of things like farms. And I thought that was really quite a positive thing. And that's what we do now. We've got rid of all the corporate trust stuff. And we are purely a private client trust business.
Yeah, so it's a bit it's a simpler business, would you say?
Well, it's simpler to explain it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we now own Give a Little as well. So we're probably responsible for giving away up to about $80 million a year, which is the nice bit of our business.
Because a lot of people listening will probably be, or may well be, more familiar with Give a Little as a company entity. Was that a deliberate effort to sort of philanthropy is a big part of what you do? Did you want to sort of bring that into the fold?
Yeah, look, the best bit of what we do is philanthropy. There is no doubt about that. And I believe that we have responsibilities. I've been lucky enough to be successful in this country, and this country, therefore, has been very good to me. I think that there is a very strong obligation on people who are successful to give back. And I also think that increasingly governments are not capable of doing heavy lifting in some areas of looking after our society. And that New Zealand is an extremely generous country. We're viewed as probably the third most generous country on the planet. The most generous when it comes to helping other people out, giving people a helping hand. So what I'm keen on doing is finding a method whereby everyday Kiwis can be everyday philanthropists. Yeah. So it's not just the big end of town leaving a bequest. It's how can we work together to help our fellow citizens when they've fallen on hard times or when they need a hand up.
Yeah. I think you've probably answered this question along the way, but the question really is making money the driver, or is it a byproduct of success?
It helps. It always helps, and I think there was a bit of me that always used to look back at the opportunities that I'd missed. Yeah. Things like real estate, and go, well, how do I want to have a view of my self-worth? And a little bit of that for a while, I think, was actually not the money necessarily, but proving I could be a success and do things that I could be proud of. And I'm quite a harsh judge of myself. But money doesn't solve issues. I'm on the King's Trust here. I remember attending a dinner in England and talking to one of the big givers to the King's Trust in the UK, and he said, what's the biggest problem you have when you buy a bigger super yacht? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, you got to buy a bigger plane. Yeah. And because that's then you have to fly all your guests down. Now that's not the real world. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I'm very conscious of, I'm a boy from the borders, from Preston. I'm very much working class, middle class roots, ordinary, and I don't ever want to step away from that. My friends are normal people. I like the normality, and therefore, no, money isn't the driver now. Making a difference really is.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions along those lines. And I suppose, one of them is, if we could make you Prime Minister for the day and you're allowed to do something to change New Zealand or solve New Zealand's issues, what would that be? I guess I'm inclined to ask whether you'd want to legislate a 4-day week.
I'll do it in two parts. Yeah. Now, interestingly, I was in Oman just after Christmas, and okay, I'm going to preface this by that is clearly an absolute monarchy, right? But the previous Sultan had a very simple philosophy for the 50 years. When there'd obviously been a civil war at the start when he came to the throne, he said, look, what I'm going to do is my people need clean water. They need access to healthcare. They need access to good housing. They need access to power, and they need access to quality education. And for 50 years, focused on those 5 things. Now, if I look at our country, is it any different? If we actually stopped playing the ridiculous games of ping pong that we suddenly see in politics, and actually sat there and said, we don't need a 3-year plan. We need a 50-year plan to actually solve those issues. And that should be, in my view, bipartisan. And it should be something that we have a very clearly articulated vision, because we shouldn't be having a world where we have huge portions of our society being disadvantaged. Would I legislate a 4-day week? No, because at the end of the day, this is not about, I'm going to give you this as of right. Yeah. This is this dynamic balance that we argue for the 100-80-100 rule, 100% pay, 80% time, 100% productivity. If it becomes a right without the obligation then at the end of the day, something will suffer. It could be corporate productivity, it could be profitability, it could be customer service, and it actually won't deliver what we need to do. That is what pays the taxes. That is what it pays the salaries. So we've got to make sure that that's maintained. But would I change the legislation to enable us to do it easily? Yes, I would. So the Holidays Act needs changes. The Employment Relations Act needs changes to facilitate it. Because the big issues we face are, we have our kids being brought up in care because we haven't got the time to raise them. We have educational issues because we haven't got the time to spend with our kids to read. We have obesity because we don't have time to cook effectively. We've got the threats of things like AI coming in. Well, we're going to have to re-educate our people. So creating more time, whilst it doesn't solve those problems, it creates the opportunity for those problems to be solved. So I would encourage governments to try it. I would encourage governments to try it in their own departments, but also help companies go down the path. But it is not as of right, because then it probably won't work.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth re-emphasising that the goal here is to maintain productivity and not just or to get rid of the time that's effectively wasted. Yeah,
I mean, the journey I went on was because the research I saw said that people were only truly productive for 3 hours a day, and everybody argues about that. But ultimately, there is a lot of body of research that says we waste a lot of time when we're in work. I'm saying is if I can convert that to productive, I can give the benefit of more time off, and that seems to work.
Yeah, so it's sort of a in a way, rather than, as you say, legislating, it is a process of education. It's a cultural shift that we kind of have to make, do you think?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think, look, the great thing about this is when we ask people in our pilots, how much we'd have to pay them to go back to working 5 days a week, about 15% of people said you can't pay me enough. Another 15 will say 75% plus. Yeah. Lots of people say 50% more. And what that says is we value free time more than I'm prepared to pay for it as an employer. And that sort of shows what we need to change, because people are desperate to have more time. And that of itself probably will create more economic activity as well. When you go back to the creation of the 5-day week, Henry Ford largely did it to create a market for his cars, because if you had 2 days off at the weekend, you needed a car to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's no different.
So you get an economic boost from people being out doing things, basically, the activity in the economy.
That's right.
Yeah. One final question, and it is a big one, is what is your attitude and how do you feel about, I guess, why it is that, some people get wealthy and others don't, which is essentially saying, bluntly, why is it that some people get rich and some people are poor?
I think it comes down often to an appreciation of risk. I didn't make money other than a salary until I was prepared to step off into the void.
Yeah.
Now, the point about this is risk-reward is the issue.
Yeah.
The more risk that you take, arguably the more reward that you can get. But for a lot of people, that is very difficult, and they don't want to take the risk. They're quite happy to take a salary, take a wage. And after all, most people, they just want to have a decent standard of living, bring up their kids the way they want to, and spend time with families. They're not actually that interested in taking the risk. Now, I think this is one of the challenges that we face, that there is a natural assumption that wealth comes without risk.
Yeah.
And actually, that's not true. There is a little bit of inherited wealth, but not as much as we might think. And therefore, when you have been the person who is not paying themselves so you can pay your staff, that's the key issue often.
Yeah. The driver, I guess.
That's the driver. Yeah. And that's often when if you do make it, you got to look back on the fact that A, you were probably lucky, but B, you were prepared to take the risk, which a lot of other people aren't prepared to take.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talk a lot about economics, and I try to explain to people that you could know all the economics in the world, and it won't make you rich unless you're prepared to take a risk, because it's, I guess I've kind of used myself as an example. I'm not an entrepreneurial risk taker. I'm quite conservative with money. And I just, the more I've learned about economics, the more people think, oh, you must be rich. But that's not the key. The key is actually going, well, no, I'm going to put the money there and do this thing. Or
if I look back over the last 10 years, there were 3 occasions when we very nearly lost the lot, because we were dealing usually with funders, we were hard against deadlines. If we'd not been able to close the next deal, we might have lost everything. So I have a very high tolerance for risk, and I think it's a theme often that comes with people that you've been talking to in other series. We have a high tolerance for risk. Am I glad I don't have to do that anymore? Can't tell you how good it is. I can actually sleep at night. Yeah. But when we sold the New Zealand Guardian Trust, I think I said to Charlotte, it was the first time that actually I could relax for something like 20 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I guess you're not taking up skydiving or anything to fill the void, or
no. No, I've done that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're in a good spot, sharing some of these ideas around the world, for starters.
Look, you don't have many chances to change the world. And I think when you do have, and something like this, which I think has hit the zeitgeist, if you will, of people all over the world, I can't think of a better legacy than maybe to find a way that we can all work less and do the things that we want to do, need to do for ourselves, our communities, our environment. If that's my legacy, that frankly is better than anything else, I've ever done.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. We'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to this episode of Money Talks. If you want to get in touch, drop me a line at liam.dan@nzme.co.nz. And you can read more from me at nzherald.co.nz. Thanks to my producer, Ethan Sills, and sound engineer, Leanne McDonald. Follow Money Talks on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, with new episodes available every Thursday.